Very recently, not 6 months ago, I went camping last minute with a few friends in the northern Minnesota National Park area. The trip was fairly normal and uneventful. I personally love the forest and nature. However, I'm quite scared and a tad superstitious. During the walk back, I was extremely fatigued and sore, so I was lagging behind as the tail end of our group. After a few hours, we reached a section of dense vegetation and mud, and I eventually lost view of the person in front of me. Now keep in mind, this wasn't too bad. I could hear them decently well, and it was only around 10 a.m. After about 20 minutes, however, they were still out of sight, and I could only hear them on and off. In fact, I was slowly beginning to think I was mixing up their sounds with my own. I yelled out for them to slow down a second, and received a muffled response that I could tell was quite far from me. I called out again, and no response. I panicked a bit and began to hustle. My senses were on full alert. I was constantly peering around through the green, looking deep and quickly for any sight of my friends. I also had a strange feeling of loneliness and like something else was near me, like an animal or something. I chalked it up to just being paranoid and scared, and focused on staying on the path and catching up with my friends. Despite the previous attempts at yelling out to them, I was pretty sure they weren't too far off. They couldn't be. I was moving at a decent pace after all. What's more, the path was pretty well defined, and I had a good memory on which way to head despite having a few miles to go. A few moments later, I realized all I could hear was the sound of my feet in the ground. The birds and wind I swore I heard not minutes before suddenly ceased. This stressed me some more, and I actually pulled out this small hunting knife that was my only weapon, as if it would protect me from anything. I kept hustling, but no matter what I could do, the paranoia and fear was getting worse. My heart was flipping out. I was tired as hell. Legs weak, arms heavy, literally. And I'm beginning to think I'm completely lost and screwed. Fast forward another gruesome 30 minutes of this. My watch's display was froze for some reason at 11:05 a.m., and my phone was off in case of absolute emergencies. I didn't feel any better, and I'm about to lose my mind. Any attempt at calling out was useless, and my voice was almost gone. I finally try to relax, having horrible exhaustion, yell out, hoping my companions hear that I'm resting for a moment, get the classic no response, and just sip some water. Now for the weird part. I start getting my pack back on, store my granola bar and water, and am getting ready to full sprint ahead, and then begin to hear rustling from behind. I whip around fast as hell, almost falling on the path's slope, and am met with my companions about 10 feet from me coming around a bend. Confused and still paranoid as ever, I start laughing hysterically. They don't know what is happening and run up to me asking how the flim-flam I ended up ahead of them. I have no clue, explain my past hour or something of terror, and just stare at my feet about to vomit. I then look back up at my friends, and their faces made me about to retaste my granola bar. They ask again how long I was separated. They're all super puzzled, and explain that it hasn't been more than 10 minutes. They even show me their watches, and it shows roughly 10:15 a.m. I slowly peek down at my watch, and it reads 11:42 a.m. Owning a Pebble smartwatch, I quickly dismissed it as a malfunction due to my phone being off, Bluetooth connection, and just urge us to all get the hell out of here. I've read a lot of stories about lost time, etc., especially in forests. I still think my watch is just garbage, and the paranoia flipped me out into dragging time. As for ending up in front of my friends, though, I blame the path being weird somewhere. I'm choosing to remain open-minded because there simply is no explanation for the events that I experienced. From 2012 to 2013, I did a lot of hiking in and around the coastal range in Oregon. I frequently would go out by myself for days and come into town to restock on food if necessary. It was commonplace for when I was in town to spend the whole day, hiking back the 4 hours to where I was camping at dusk. The trail I took wasn't well traveled, and looked more like a deer path than anything. I had chosen my campsite for its lack of foot traffic and its serenity, avoiding conventional locations. I had only a cell phone on me during this period of hiking and camping, no bright clothing, and no GPS tracking device and/or emergency beacon. Probably wasn't the smartest idea looking back. There were times I heard and saw things while out in the forest that I didn't recognize by sight and/or sound, but nothing came close to the incident I had in May 2013. I had done my usual restock in a small town some 6 miles from where I had decided to camp for the night, and I spent the day in town as usual. I started walking back to my camp location about dusk. Half of the walk I chose to use dirt roads until veering off on the deer trail I used earlier in the day. By this time it was completely dark, but it was clear out and possible to see the trail still using the moonlight. I don't listen to headphones while hiking. I have always thought it's wise to be able to hear what's around me in the event there's a predator, whether human, animal, or whatever. I was mentally doing some calculations for the next day's hike when my mind is literally stopped mid-track. I hadn't heard anything, and I don't make hardly any sound when hiking. If I had heard something, I would have known. For some reason, be it a sixth sense or survival instinct, I'm not sure. But I was jolted quite suddenly out of thought and very aware of the fact I wasn't alone on this trail. What was odd to me especially is that even though I had heard nothing whatsoever, light wind, no birds, I knew acutely that something was behind me, specifically about 30 yards down the trail. I still to this day have so many unanswered questions about how I knew this. Standing really still, I turn around and look down the trail. I don't see anything, but I feel it. It's honestly really difficult to pin down exactly how to describe what I felt because I hadn't felt that way before or since. It was straight up fight or flight, and my logical mind was saying there's nothing out of the ordinary while my senses were saying get the hell out of there. Again, looking back and remembering this, I have no idea what to say. This is really hard to write. It was like I was being taunted and I felt it. The presence of something or someone was down that trail, and for some reason I knew that it knew it was there even though I couldn't see it. That's what still scares me to this day. It knew, and it was bright enough out for me to see down the trail 30 yards back, no problem. There wasn't anything on that trail, and I will swear by it. It was like I was being taunted or beckoned to come closer. This was maybe 30 seconds into looking down the trail, if that. I was panicking, but I still wasn't sure what to think because I wasn't seeing anything threatening, so I turned around, started walking a quick pace. I didn't know what else to do. I knew that if it was in fact a guy out to kill someone, he's probably going to end up killing me on this trail or in my tent after following me back to it. So why run was my logical thought. I would say it was not even a minute into quick trek back that I hear what I can only describe as a sound like rushing or swooping air, followed by what seemed like a rake sliding across the dirt trail, the former sound happening right after the latter sound. These sounds happened together in half a second apart for 4 times, and they were very close to me, maybe 20 yards back. Looking back, I don't know how I was able to stay composed and not soil myself, but somehow I mentally stayed focused on getting back to my tent, ignored the panic, and just kept walking quickly, not looking back. Whoever or whatever it was still followed me the majority of the next hour. I just kept heading forward and didn't look back. A few minutes from my camp location, the fight or flight feeling gradually but succinctly left, and I crawled into my tent and didn't sleep a minute that entire night. Morning came, I packed up, and I left. I was 21 years old when this happened. I am living near a small forest. People use it to give their dog a walk or jog. It's not that big. One night, me and my friends gathered there for a car meet. After we had enough fun, one of my friends told me we should go in the forest to play randonautica. As a child, I was grown by my grandparents. I was used to seeing impossible things, as I still believe to this day my grandma is not from this world. Anyway, we entered the forest. Everybody chose something on the app, and we began to feel that thing. We all agreed to try to feel a ghost or evil entity. My 2 friends began laughing after that, and we entered the forest more after we had a close location. It was about 200 meters from us. As we walked, noises around us stopped. Even the crickets went silent. After we reached the location, they pulled up their flashlights. The forest is pitch black even though it is near a well-circulated road, and we began searching for something in that perimeter. After we discovered nothing, nausea hit me and chills went down my spine. I never felt so frightened in my life after I saw what I saw. There was a woman dressed in a gray dress with a wooden stick in her right hand. She was bent forward like a question mark, and she was talking gibberish. She was wearing a scarf on her head. We call it batik here. My 2 friends made a run for it, but I was too terrified to move. She got her head up and I never saw something more horrifying in my entire life. It made all the horror movies I saw seem like girl makeup videos. Her face was coal like pitch black with 2 white eyes. I could see that because I had my phone flashlight on. The hair was embalmed with some brown liquid and she smelled rotten. She started coming, slowly but surely after me. I ran for my life. Nobody could save me from that. After I got to my car, I drove home. When I reached home, my grandma called me and asked me if I am okay. I just said yes. I did not realize it at that time. She already knew, I think. I am still shocked to this day. In my tradition, we call it Muma Paduri, the mother of the forest. And you never want to encounter her. I'm sometimes too nice to my friends. I tend to do favors for my friends, even if they seem pretty ridiculous, as long as it's not terribly out of my way. Most of the time, it's help I'm drunk and need a ride home. Well, one night at like 1:30 a.m. I get the call. A very, very drunk friend of mine, Claire, is begging me to come pick her up and give her a ride home soon. The bar is closing soon and she's too drunk to drive home. The bar she is at isn't too far from my house, about a 10-15 minute drive. But the issue is that she lives like 45 minutes on the other side of town. Claire has been extremely nice to me in the past and I did owe her a solid, so I grab my keys and my concealed carry and leave the house. I get to the bar at around 2:05 and she's sitting outside on a bench by the doorman. I pull into the parking lot, which was pretty empty since the bar is closed, and I assumed that the cars remaining were the workers who had yet to leave. I get out of the car and start walking to Claire, who is kinda slumped over. I was hoping she wasn't passed out drunk, and when I got to her, the doorman asked me if I was her ride. I told him yes, showed my ID for proof, and what he said next was of some concern. He kind of pulls me in and says, "Hey, I was supposed to leave when we closed, but I have a strong feeling your friend was roofied. She's been on the porch drinking all night and some guy kept hovering around her. I assumed it was a boyfriend or whatever, but she never turned to talk to the guy. She was either drinking or chatting with other girls around her. Well, anyways, she chugged her last drink, came up to me and told me you would be coming to pick her up, and she asked me if she could sit by me. She told me she felt very dizzy and sick. I told her sure, hoping she just drank too much and she passed out right after she sat down. After that, I couldn't see that guy anymore, but I didn't want to take any chances. So visibly concerned, I thanked the guy profusely, and he even helps me carry Claire to my car. Midway to carrying her, she's kind of coming to like someone just waking up after a surgery. That really groggy, not knowing where they are, talking of nonsense, kind of talking. So we get her buckled in. I thank the guy again, and he just says he hopes she gets home safe. So now, hoping my friend is only stupid drunk and not drugged, I start driving to her house. The whole time I'm trying to keep an eye on her, and an eye on the road. She's now snoring asleep, which puts me at ease a bit. But about halfway to her house, my fuel light comes on. I pull into the next gas station. It's one of those small gas stations that doesn't have 24-hour store. So I'm on extra high alert while I start to pump gas. The gas station is about a block from the freeway and right at the corner of the intersection. The street itself is pretty dark, with lonely lampposts shining very pitiful lights at large intervals. I get that really dead feeling, like this place is just abandoned. I drive a Corvette, so the filler is on the rear end of the car, and I'm leaning against the rear looking around. To me left, I hear this weird metallic scraping sound, so I turn and see this guy, about 15-20 feet from me, come around the corner dragging a long metal pipe on the ground. I immediately sense that I'm in a possibly dangerous situation now. The guy looks almost possessed, but he's not looking at me, rather like he's trying to look into my car. I'm on the defensive, but hope I can get him to leave, so I call out, "Hey, everything all right?" Without looking at me, he answers back, "You took my girlfriend from me, I'm here to take her back." Now he turns to look at me and he's got blood in his eyes. Before he begins to take a step though, I start yelling, hoping it'll get him to back off. I'm a little over 6 feet tall and not exactly skinny, but not exactly bulky either. But I have a really deep voice. Back off, turn around and leave, and no one has to get hurt. He takes a step towards me. clearly unimpressed. So almost automatically, I pull my handgun from my inside the waistband holster and draw a bead on him. "Back off, you don't have to die," I start yelling louder. Pretty sure my voice cracked because I'm scared. No amount of self-defense classes and time at the range prepares you emotionally for this kind of situation. Even though I carry, I'm really against violence, and killing someone is not something I want to do. Anyway, in a panic, the guy throws the pipe at me. It whizzes by, thankfully not towards my car but to my right, and I dive behind my car for cover. I have no idea if he has a gun himself or what, but I was going to put some kind of cover between me and him, and by the time I kneel up and aim over the rear of my car, he's booked it. I hear a car door slam and tires screech, and he launches off the curb on the east side of the lot and is tearing down the road, swaying all over the place. In my own panicked hurry, I pull the pump out of the car, screw the cap on, and tear out of there myself. Claire, however, is still passed out in my car, and now I'm afraid because I'm convinced she'd been drugged and we were followed by that guy. Me being more concerned about her earlier and keeping on the road, I must not have noticed being followed. The whole way back to her house, I'm wary of any car that's behind me. I'm also driving very aggressively, and when I get to Claire's neighborhood, I circle a separate block that's not hers 4 times to make sure no one followed me. When I was satisfied thinking I wasn't being followed anymore, I pulled up to her house and tried to shake her awake. She's doing that groggy waking up stuff from before, but now she's able to get up. I'm able to walk her. Thankfully, I was worried I was going to have to call an ambulance if she didn't wake up, and I get her keys from her bag. I managed to walk her inside, and at this point she's kind of coming around, asking me what's going on, where she is, etc. I tell her she's home and get her to lie down. She's completely lost looking, and her eyes start welling up. She clings to me and starts sobbing. She's still very out of it, but I'm guessing she realizes something bad was going on or attempted on her. I was able to get her to lie down and get her to sleep. I write a note for her which pretty much said, "Hey, I'll be in the next room. We're going to the hospital in the morning to get you checked out." Fast forward to the morning, she's sick and throwing up. I drove her to the hospital where she got tested and treated. I still shudder to think what might have happened had I not had my gun with me. I do know martial arts, but that's not something I want to take against a crazy person with a pipe. Claire still doesn't remember much from the night except calling me and wanting to sit next to the doorman. That night could have ended badly in 1,000 different ways, but thankfully, even luckily, everyone made it out safe. I am a 20-year-old Hooters girl and encounter creepy guys all the time, but never likes this. I occasionally get asked for my number and to go on dates by older men, but always politely turn them down without really upsetting anyone. Anyone who says anything perverted or uncomfortable gets kicked out, by the way, so that's a rare occurrence. I was working the night shift the other night and had a 40-something-year-old man sit at my table by himself. I greeted him the same way I greet all customers. Lots of smiling, laugh at their jokes, ask about his day, etc. He was really irritated and didn't seem to want to talk to me at all, so I assumed he was there to eat and go without all the chatting customers expect from the waitresses. I offered a box and dessert at the end of his meal, but he just paid and got up to leave. When I brought back his change, he grabbed my arm and pulled me close and said, "I want you so badly," before letting go and walking out the door. I was so uncomfortable that I just stood there until he left. This was around 8 p.m., so I told the other girls, then got over it. We close at midnight on weekdays, so by the time I was ready to go, it was about 1:30 a.m. I carry a stun gun in my bag and normally have someone walk me to my car. But it was so late that nearly everyone had already left, and those that were still there were busy trying to clean up so they could leave. I had parked right in front of the doors, leaving my car only 5 feet away, so I decided to quickly get in my car without being walked. I always lock my doors out of habit and went to check my phone, which was dead. I have one of those crappy chargers in my car that only charge at a certain angle, and was trying to get my phone to charge when a truck pulled up behind me, blocking me in. I couldn't pull forward because the restaurant was in front of me and I couldn't back up because of this truck. At first I thought it was my roommate who will sometimes come check on me if I get home too late to make sure I'm okay. It was a silver truck, which is what my roommate drives. But when I turned to look at it, it was a different model, which made my heart sink. This person then proceeded to honk their horn at me over and over for a good 5 minutes, trying to get me out of my car. When I refused, he pulled up next to me, started knocking on my window, and yelled at me to get out of my car. It was the same guy that was at my table 5 hours earlier. My phone wouldn't turn on, so I switched into reverse and fast and furioused my way out of the parking lot. He started following me with his truck, so I ran a red light and started speeding. He stopped at the light, and I drove for a bit before going home in case he caught up and tried following me to my house. I checked my car when I got home in case he hit my car and was trying to let me know, but I didn't see any marks. I don't know whether he was trying to rob me or kidnap me, but creepy man who waited 5 hours in the parking lot for me, I really hope we never meet again. I was always a very introverted girl, and all of my close friends were over the internet. And I was dating, and still am, a lovely young man from Scotland. I lived in the south of England at the time, and after 5 months of dating, I'd finally get to meet him in person. I knew he was a legitimate person, but being the anxious ball of nerves I am, I made sure to do it in a very public place. He was exactly who I knew him as, and was not the one who tried to kidnap me on that day. He had to catch the train back to London, where he was staying late that evening, and I, knowing the area like the back of my hand and having walked around it thousands of times before at much younger ages, walked him back to the train station and said my very tearful goodbyes to the boy I loved. I left, crying, not knowing when I'd see him again, and made my way toward the bus stop that'd take me home. That was, until a very tall Indian man about 6, roughly in his 40s, came up to me as I was crossing the street and hugged me. Now I was beside myself with sorrow at my love's departure, and the hug made me cry even more despite all the red flags going off in my head. People in this area had been known to be quite friendly, even with strangers, and I just had to pray he was one of them. He took my hands and held my wrists so I could not walk away. I began to panic at this point. Too weak to break the man's hold on me, too choked up to call for help. He asked me what was wrong and told me, "A sweetheart like you shouldn't be on the streets crying. Come with me, I can make it all better." I immediately declined, saying that I had just had to say goodbye to my boyfriend. Big mistake to tell the man I was definitely alone, I know now, and that I just wanted to go home. He wouldn't let go of my wrists after that, and tightened his grip to a painful amount. He told me he would give me things that would make me feel better, and that I needed to come with him. I continuously declined, praying someone would walk down that street, usually very busy, but not at 8 p.m. when the shops in that area are all closed. And to my luck, nobody did. The man eventually started demanding that I give him a kiss and he'd let me go. Keep in mind, I had only just had my first kiss with the boy I loved earlier that day, and now I was being made to kiss this disgusting man. Or else who knows what would have happened to me. I did, as much as I hated it with every bone in my body. And he did let me go, to my surprise. I hurried away from him and ran as fast as I could to the bus stop, immediately calling my boyfriend and telling him what happened. He still beats himself up to this day about it, saying he should have made sure I got home safe first. I always tell him there was no way he could have known that would happen, and having walked that route so many times in the past, I didn't think that something like that would ever happen to me. It still troubles me to this day, and I'm still very nervous going anywhere alone. Granted, I used the event as a comedic point towards the common statement, "Never meet strangers off the internet." But the whole ordeal definitely makes me very uncomfortable still. So this happened right before my 20th birthday, when I was in the U.S. Navy. I was stationed at a Navy school in South Carolina for the entirety of my enlistment, close to Charleston but not actually in the city. It wasn't uncommon for people with cars to drive into the city, and everyone was friends with someone who had a car. My class leader and I, we'll call him Percy, were really close, and he was friends with this New Yorker that I didn't like much. We'll call him Tom. But Tom had a car, so we ended up doing a lot together. One night after all three of us had bombed an important test, I convinced them to go for ice cream. We decided on this little shop on the far side of Charleston and piled into Tom's truck. After we had gotten our ice cream, Percy went to start giving Tom directions. Tom couldn't find his way out of a shoebox, but Tom insisted he knew a shortcut, and we needed to just enjoy the ride. We didn't have anything early the next day, so I figured this would probably be a funny story later when Tom gets us lost. So we're driving for at least twice as long as it would have taken to get back to base, but Tom keeps promising we're almost there. Meanwhile, we haven't seen a building in at least 10 miles, and the road is so dark I feel like I'm looking into the abyss. Tom mentions that he has to pee, so Percy and I tell him to just pull over and take a leak. The road was lined with a forest, so he had options to save his dignity, but he insists on pulling all the way off the road. So Tom finds a dirt road and turns down it, and Percy and I look at each other and both say he needs to stop. Percy and I are both from the South, while Tom grew up in mostly New York, so Percy and I both knew how real shoot first, ask questions later can be. But Tom kept saying he was just going to go a little further through the trees. I'm thinking about how we're going to get shot because I wanted ice cream when we break through the tree line. About 20 yards in front of us was a big bonfire that was bright compared to the light from the new moon. Immediately, my stomach dropped, and Percy and I both started screaming at Tom to turn around. That's when we noticed the figures around the fire, and those closing in around us. Tom was frozen in the driver's seat, so I reached into the front and put the truck in reverse while hitting him repeatedly in the shoulder. Tom slowly turned around to check behind him to back up, only for him to freeze again. I turned and saw more figures closing around the trail behind us. Percy by now had pulled out a flashlight and was trying to blind the figures while repeatedly telling Tom to just go and that they'd move. So Tom starts to slowly make his way back while Percy's whipping his flashlight around, and I'm making sure all the doors are locked and rolling up the rear windows and closing the back sliding window. The crowd parted like we were Moses and they were the Red Sea, and we made it back onto the road without any other problems. We rode the rest of the way in almost complete silence, and the three of us have never actually spoken about it since. The only thing that was said on the ride home was when Percy turned to me and said, "They didn't have faces." I'm not a stranger to weird dreams. The majority of them turn scary in some way, but this one was all too real for me. A few years ago, when I was back in high school, I had gone to sleep and had begun to dream about an odd place. I remember it had maroon walls and deep red carpeting. It reminded me a lot of a suit parlor, if that's anything. I started seeing some of my older relatives walking around me, such as my grandmother brushing dust off my clothes, etc. Everyone around me had a very somber demeanor about them, and I had no idea why. At some point, some people I didn't recognize began moving around me as well, and I finally asked what was happening. One of the men I did not recognize essentially told me that I was dying, and I was being prepared for the afterlife. They conceded and told me that I would be allowed one more day to live to say goodbye to those I care about, and then I woke up. I never tend to take dreams seriously, as they are often bizarre enough, but what could I do? I was upset for the better part of the day, telling some of my friends at school about what I had dreamt. Considering how I was acting that day, I was surprised by how little they seemed to care. Later in the day, I brushed it off as an unsettling dream and nothing more. In the evening, myself and 2 other students from the school were practicing for our driver's permit exam, sharing one car, and taking turns driving it across the county, with the instructor sitting in the passenger seat. Since this was after school and everyone needed enough time to practice their driving, this thing ran until after sundown. Once everyone had gotten their turns in, the instructor asked if anyone would like to volunteer to drive back to the school in the dark, which my confident self agreed to do. As we were driving back to the school, we were going along a road with a large number of curves, with steep hills on one side of the road, which meant that it was hard to see around the other side. With the other two students asleep in the back seat, I myself was thinking how well I had been doing at driving. Then, bright headlights came around one of the curves. My instructor immediately reached over to pull the steering wheel to avoid colliding head-on with a Jeep. If my instructor hadn't been paying attention, I almost certainly would have hit that car, and it would have hit my side of the car the hardest. I firmly believe that I was meant to die that day. This happened a few years back. I was with my family. I'm 11 at the time, driving in the middle of nowhere in Montana in the dead of winter. We used to own this place out in the literal middle of nowhere, and every once in a while we'd drive out and spend a week fishing, camping, and hiking. So we were driving back toward civilization. Everyone was tired. Big walls of snow on either side of the road. Beyond the dirty snowbanks, you could see really thick tree lines. We were cruising along, climbing up over this mountain pass. I remember I had half of my forehead pressed against the cold glass while I tiredly watched what little snow and nature I could make out in the dark when I saw this person. I'll always remember her as female. Either way, they were wearing a tattered coat, multiple layers, carrying a couple of big bags, and I remember seeing a flash of a cold face. I wasn't the only one to see her. My dad mumbled, "See that? Must be freezing out there." My mom said something like, maybe we should give them a ride. But we were already a half-mile away. My little sister was asleep, but the talking roused her, and when I told her what I saw, maybe I added a couple of creepy details like a hook for a hand or something, she got creeped out and kept her eyes glued to the window for the next few miles. So we get to the top of this mountain and we begin the descent down the other side. The driving conditions weren't great, but the old family car was doing just fine. We leveled out a bit and I started scanning the distance for any signs of the city, towns, anything. Nothing. Snow. Trees. Totally alone. We began the real descent when we started winding down this mountain pass. Hairpin turns. Everyone's on edge. Mom tries to get us to go back to sleep, but I can't. I have this funny feeling. I'm staring out the window at the snow and trees. We haven't passed a car for what seemed like hours. I remember my dad starts talking about something. And that's when I see her again, standing out in the snow. I get a brief glimpse where they are illuminated by the headlights but then gone, streaming past us into the dark. Okay, so this time I got a better look at her face and I wish I hadn't. A really strange smile in the middle of a very disfigured face, maybe like a horrible burn. In that brief second, I can't get the image out of my head. It felt like she was staring right at me, smiling, some messed up kind of understanding in her small black eyes. So we drive on for a bit. I remember just staring out the window. It immediately struck me, how did she get there? How could she travel miles and miles in front of us? We didn't pass a car, truck, anything. And there wasn't any other road out there. So this part of my story I get a bit hazy on, mainly because I don't really remember. I just sort of remember sitting there thinking, trying to make sense of it all. We get to the bottom of that mountain and make it to some roadside motel. And we all stamp the snow off our boots before walking into the room. I didn't sleep much. Next morning we found this little diner right outside the town we stayed in. Classic trucker stop. We ate. After the bill was paid and we zipped up our coats, I heard the door chime. We all were heading out, and I looked up and saw her again. Same coat. The dozens of hooded sweaters. The big bags filled with what looked like damp clothing. I was walking out behind my dad. He towered over me, but I remember this look she gave me as she passed. She really looked like she hated me, like she enjoyed the idea of someone suffering, all with that big disfigured smile. She stopped beside me, but I stayed behind my dad until we got to the car. I don't know what really was going on. Couldn't help but feel bad for her, if she truly was lost out there, if maybe someone had hurt her. Probably a dozen explanations, but can't shake the weird feeling like she was following us. This happened several years ago, and I won't go into a ton of detail because Google exists and I don't want to point a bit arrow to where it happened by saying too much. I had worked at a big pizza chain for almost a year at this point, so I was aware of a lot of the dangers of the job, robberies, drunken morons, naked people, etc. But this instance really made it sink in. A girl had been reported missing in our area under super suspicious circumstances. It was a big deal in a relatively small town where things like that don't happen super frequently. It was all over the news, billboards were being put up, the whole shebang. We had state cops, other county cops, and federal investigators all in town to help. A few weeks after the initial report, they announced an arrest. They had the guy dead to rights. No question that he was the one who did it. When I got to work that day, someone asked me if I had seen the announcement. I hadn't yet, so I pulled up the news article on my phone. I know that name. I know that address. I know that face. A month or so prior, I had delivered to this guy. His apartment complex was a few blocks down the road. To add to the creep factor, this dude lived in a complex with several buildings where each one had a locked door to get into the building. It's full of young kids that are almost always drunk and ignorant when they order, and I'd had issues there before. Due to that, I made a point to always have customers come and meet me at the main door as opposed to being buzzed in and going to their unit door. Usually it wasn't a huge deal, but this dude really tried to press the issue and had several excuses to why he couldn't come down and I needed to come up. Each one was met with, "Company policy doesn't allow me to do that," until he finally came down. He was less than enthusiastic, but paid for his pizza and I went about my way. As a female, and given that this happened within a few weeks of him kidnapping and killing the other girl, I am so immensely grateful for all the drunken morons that caused me to stop going inside of the buildings at this complex. Being a delivery driver for several pizza places a few years back, I had a lot of experiences with weird customers or just strange things that would happen at night. But this one night takes the prize for the most disturbing and unusual situation. I had been working at the specific chain pizza shop for just under a year. I worked mid-shifts and night shifts alongside one other co-worker for the most part. It would stay busy basically up until closing at 2 a.m., so there wasn't a ton of time to mess around, especially since it was just the two of us. I'll call my co-worker Jerry to keep his privacy. He was in charge during the night shifts and would make all the pizzas while I would deliver them. Both of us would answer calls though, depending on who was busy and who wasn't. Anyway, it was just past 11 p.m., and I had gotten back from a delivery when the phone rang. Seeing Jerry in the middle of making a pizza, I picked up the phone. A man on the other line spoke, asking for a large sausage pizza. I put in the order and asked if he needed anything else. The man didn't answer for a moment, then he repeated himself, saying that he'd like a large sausage pizza. This time I could tell through the way he mumbled it out that he was likely drunk. I confirmed that he just wanted one pizza, and the man said yes. I sent the order through, then grabbed my next delivery and dropped it off. Getting back to the shop, Jerry had finished the guy's order and prepped it for delivery, so I grabbed it off the counter and ran to my car. I noticed as I was grabbing the order through, Jerry was giving me a weird look, as if he wanted to say something to me but decided not to. The address was a good 15 minutes away, but there was no traffic at this time, so I got there pretty early. The house was normal but had a lot of land on either side, with the neighbors' homes barely visible through the trees. I got out and went around to the passenger door to pick up the pizza, then I headed up to the porch and knocked on the door. A few seconds later, a man came and opened the door wide open. But his face when he saw me seemed very confused and surprised, as if he hadn't expected to see me. Figuring he was just drunk and out of it, I handed him the box and told him his total, to which he slowly and awkwardly handed me cash without saying anything. He held the box of pizza while standing in front of me and looked at it with a strange intensity. Then he moved his eyes up towards me, but not at me. He was looking over my shoulder like he saw something, but was just staring at it with that same intensity before shaking his head slowly, like he was saying no. Getting really uncomfortable watching this man, I couldn't help but look back. I turned my head over my right shoulder and looked toward the driveway. A few feet from my car was a hooded man running back towards the trees. My heart jumped, and I felt my body go into a sort of shock, trying to figure out what to do. I turned back around to face the man at the door, but he immediately stepped back and slammed the door shut. It all happened so fast in just a matter of seconds and gave me no time to react. With the door closed in front of me, I turned to face the hooded man again, but he was lost in the dark tree line. I stumbled off the porch and ran to my car, backing out of the driveway as soon as possible and driving back to work. I calmed myself during the drive, but still couldn't understand what had happened. When I got back, I told Jerry about the encounter, who seemed to have very little reaction, and rather just told me to deliver the next order when I was ready. I did as he said, but on my way back from the delivery, I ended up pulling over and calling the police to let them know just in case. They said they would have an officer check it out and call me back to update me. I got a call an hour later, and once I got out of work, I waited in the parking lot for the police to show up and talk to me. When the officer came up to my car, he mentioned that he talked to the man at the residence who matched the description I gave him. The guy told the officer that he was just waiting for his buddy Jerry to show up since he knew he worked at the pizza shop. When asked about the hooded man, he gave no details, saying he didn't know anything about that, and he didn't see anyone. With that information, I was even more horrified and confused. I thought maybe they called thinking Jerry was a delivery driver and were setting him up so that they could jump him. That would explain the hooded man by my car and the surprise of the guy at the door. I talked to Jerry on multiple occasions about it though, but he gave me quick, useless answers, saying the guy was just an old friend and that he didn't know anything about anything. I still don't know for sure what the situation was, but it was by far the strangest and creepiest I've ever had. So I worked as a delivery driver for 2 years, and this is the creepiest thing that happened to me. I was sent on a delivery around 1 p.m., so it was nice and sunny outside. I get to this house, which was in a nice neighborhood. I ring the bell and an old lady answers it. She has a walker and hands over the money to me. She then asks if I can put the pizza on her kitchen table because she is alone and carrying things is hard for her. For safety reason, delivery drivers are not to enter a customer's house. But I thought she's old and needs my help. What if this was my grandma? So I go in. I walk into her kitchen and take the pizza and place it on the table. I then hear a thumping noise. I think nothing of it. She says, "Let me give you an extra tip for helping me, wait here." She walks away and I am left there alone. I hear the thumping noise again. I ask her if she heard something, she says no. I then hear another thud followed by an almost dragging sound coming from the second floor. I tell her, "That's not necessary. I got 2 other deliveries to take and had to go." She said, "It's fine, I almost have it." I start making my way toward the front door. As I got closer, I heard a gasp coming from the top of the stairs next to the door. I look up and saw something rush backwards, then I open the front door. I hear, "Here you are, sweetie." I say thank you and rush to my car. When inside, I see her watching me from the front door. Now this next part, I am not sure if it happened or if I imagined it. But I thought I saw someone in a window from the second floor. I gunned it out of there. I told my coworkers, but they looked at me like I was crazy. Thankfully, I never delivered there again. I am a 21-year-old senior in college living with 3 other girls in an old 1-story house. We are located about a 15-minute walk from main campus, and the majority of our neighbors are college students. That being said, this town is notorious for being a little, well, sketchy. Millie is home to one of the first insane asylums built in America. After the majority of it being closed down, abandoned for years, the final building was shut down about a month ago, and the remaining patients were released. Now, I doubt this is directly correlated with my creepy experience, but I am not the only one who has interesting encounters with strangers since the release in this town. 2 nights ago, after getting off work around 11:30, I came home to my roommates getting ready to go for a night out. I realize now how stupid it was, but we often had an open door policy, free for anyone to come over and visit as they please. We would lock the door at night, but the one time we forgot really came to bite me in the ass. Around midnight, I was hopping in the shower as my roommates were heading out the door. We said our goodbyes and I told them I would be meeting up with them later. I had just stepped out of the shower when I heard what sounded like the front door slamming shut. I automatically assumed one of the girls had forgotten something, so I called out their names. No response. I then hear footsteps in the hallway. I call out again. No response. Fear and dread came over me, and I immediately grabbed my clothes and ran into my bedroom. I threw my clothes on, leaned my ear to the door, and waited in silence to hear if someone was in the house. I hear nothing. I decided that it must have been one of my roommates grabbing something and leaving again, so I head into the living room to get my phone. 6 missed calls and it's still ringing. My roommate Carrie was on the other end. I answered and immediately could hear the panic in her voice. "Lee, are you in the house?" Me. "Yes, why, Carrie?" "You need to get out. Sam drove by and said he saw a man walking through the front door. He called the police, but you need to leave." Nothing was going through my head besides pure adrenaline and fear. I wasn't sure of the man's intentions, but I sure wasn't going to wait to find out. While remaining on the phone with my roommate, I bolted out the front door and hid behind my car. As my friends approached in a truck, I sprinted out from behind my car and jumped in the back of their truck bed. Just as I did that, a dark figure scurried up into the woods running in the opposite direction. I can only assume he had been inching closer to as I was waiting for them to arrive. I screamed bloody murder and we floored it out of there. I refused to go back into the house until the police arrived and it had been triple checked. There were no signs of anything being touched or stolen, which makes me wonder what the man's intentions were. I live in a basement apartment of a somewhat older building, at least 100 years old, I figure. There is no front door entrance to it, only 2 side entrances which tenants can use to reach the laundry room, and 1 back door into the building, which only I have the key for, along with the building managers. I've only used the back door a few times, and that was for moving furniture in and out because my side entrances are impossible to use for stuff like that because the stairwell is so steep and the walls so narrow. Otherwise, I never use the back door. Where I live, it's really snowy at the moment. 2 days ago, when I left through my usual side door, I noticed that there was a shoveled path to the back of the building, which literally no one has a single reason to do or be back there. There is nothing back there for use, only a door to get into my apartment like I said. But I thought this was highly suspicious, but I chalked it up to whoever the contractor for snow removal was just trying to be thorough and clear a path to the back, because surely they don't know who uses that back door or not. They have no reason to. There's actually a porch that can help you get into the main hallway too, but that door is as locked down as can be. But again, no one knows that but tenants. Anyways, ever since the shoveled snow, I've been a bit more suspicious. 3 weeks ago, someone stole my motorcycle from the driveway close to the back door. And it's put me on high alert because obviously I'm so pissed and violated that someone went so far as to steal my motorcycle from my driveway under video surveillance. Unfortunately, the cameras were broken and not set up right, so there actually was no recorded footage, only a big camera pointing at you. So last night, around 10:30 p.m. or so, I let my little dog outside for the last time of the night. I hadn't slept in 36 hours or so like I sat above, and I was ready to pack it up. When I came back in from letting my dog out, I took a look at the back door and realized that the deadbolt was disengaged, which sort of unnerved me. That's highly unusual because there's no need for it to be. Even more than that, there is a key broken off inside the deadbolt. So I have literally no way to lock it at the moment. My alarms are going off on all levels. I figure there's a chance that it's nothing, but as an extra measure, I put a big-ass brick in front of the door so that if anyone opened the door, the brick would move and I'd know that someone used the door because of it. Then I went to bed. 3 o'clock in the morning comes and my little dog starts barking her head off. No one comes down to the basement at 3 a.m. The laundry room is across the hall from my apartment, but no one is doing laundry at 3 a.m., and I heard no laundry being done. I get up and get close to our main door, being very quiet, letting my dog bark. My dog is a dachshund, by the way, big bark, little bite, and it's noticeable. As I approach my door, I hear the doorknob jiggle a bit, but thankfully I engaged my deadbolt before bed. I'm freaking out about this at this point. Thankfully, I've sort of prepared for this sort of situation in my mind. 1,000 times I've anticipated someone coming down and trying to open my door. I stand back from the door and yell to the man that I have a Glock 9mm in my hands, ready to unload with lethal force. The police are on their way. They actually weren't. I was so amped up I didn't think about it at the time. I then heard footsteps book it out of there up the side stairs and away. So, I just got a new job back in October, working tech support on the graveyard shift. I work from 1 a.m. 12 p.m. Friday through Mondays. Needless to say, adjusting my sleep schedule has been quite the task, but I have managed. On the days that I don't work, I still follow my work schedule, waking up at midnight and staying up until at least 2 p.m. before falling asleep as to keep my sleep schedule in line with my work schedule. I bought blackout curtains to help with this, as trying to sleep with the sun shining is not easy for me. I usually require complete darkness. I live alone. I started noticing weird things happening around my apartment when I would get home from work, or after waking up on my days off. Just little things at first, lights being on, that I swear I turned off, doors being left open or closed. Just so everyone can get a bit of understanding about my apartment, I live on the second floor and my building is right behind the leasing office. The entrance to my apartment requires you to enter the building first. Then there is a hallway with 2 apartments on either side. Then you can enter the apartment. Each apartment has 2 deadbolts, one that you can unlock from the outside and another that requires you to unlock from the inside. There is also a balcony which faces east, complete with a large sliding glass door and screen. I use it quite frequently as I had potted plants out there, but have brought them inside due to the cold weather. I also have 2 cats, Luna and Eclipse, who until recently lived with me. I am moving soon and can't afford the pet deposit, so my parents offered to let them stay at their place for the time being. Eclipse is Luna's daughter, and only 6 months old, so she follows her mom around all the time. I'd usually find them cuddled up together on my chair or bed, and recently they'd trapped themselves in the bathroom. Now that they're not here, it had gotten harder to pass off these weird occurrences as my cats. Doors are still being left open and closed, and food has been disappearing from my fridge. At first I passed this off as just me being my usual self, and just not remembering that I ate something when I was half asleep or bored. Recently my boss gave me permission to work from home, as this shift is brand new, as the company is moving to 24/7 support, and the building owner refuses to heat my floor for my shift for only 2 people. So I've been doing that for the past couple weeks, and last week I noticed the metal rod that acts as a secondary lock on the balcony door wasn't engaged, so I put it back. I didn't think much of it at the time, as my computer faces my balcony door. I like to people watch and watch the sunrise, sue me, and I sometimes fidget with it with my feet while playing video games. On the 11th of December, my credit card information was stolen and my account was charged $3,000. I was in the office that day as a favor to my coworker, who was really creeped out being in the office alone in the middle of the night. The charge was made at 11:40 a.m., just a few moments before I gotten off work, and I had the card on me still. I was restless and didn't sleep well. I wake up at midnight, per usual, on Monday morning, and get my setup ready to take calls. Now, almost no calls come in on the weekends, so I'm usually screwing around on Reddit, Facebook, YouTube, and Netflix. Around 3 a.m. I was catching up on the 100 when someone unlocked my door. I don't mean picked the lock, I mean used a key. Thank God the secondary deadbolt was engaged, but the person jiggled the door to try and get it to open. I ran and grabbed my gun, Looked out the peephole but saw nothing. I opened the door with the intent to shoot someone, but the person was already gone. I called the cops. They didn't find anything. There are no cameras in the hallways of the building, or outside them for that matter, and they told me that there wasn't enough evidence for them to do anything about it, and left. I didn't sleep at all the next night and decided to stay home on my days off to try and catch the person if they tried to come back. I also asked the leasing office if they handed out any extra keys to my apartment, and they said no, and informed them that I changed the locks on my door. I keep my Christmas tree and decorations in the storage closet and decided it was time to set it up. As I'm pulling out the tree this evening, it's only a 5-foot tall fake tree that has all the lights attached to it already. I notice a bag back behind it. A small black duffel bag in it. I found a change of clothes, sunglasses, shoes, toiletries, and a notebook. What was in the notebook horrified me. There were notes about me. What hours, days I worked, notes about my cats, and updated notes that they were no longer there, and the date, my credit card number. As I went further and further back in the notes, I found 2 words, circled multiple times, balcony door, which I assume is how the person entered my apartment for the first time. This creep had been living in my apartment while I've been at work for the past month, and I didn't even know it. The worst part is that I was in my apartment at the same time as this guy, at some point, and didn't even know it. That's the only way he would have gotten my credit card number and my house key to make a copy somewhere. I've called the police and they're on their way over. I'm writing this as I'm waiting for them to show up. It's the only thing that's keeping me sane right now. Plus, I think it will help me organize my thoughts so I can best explain to the officers what has happened.